Are you looking for a delicious snack cake with lots of fruit flavor, but one that doesn't require you to process a lot of fruit? I have the perfect solution for you here. These are my Jam-Swirled snack cakes. So delicious and bursting with fruit flavor. I'll be experimenting with a baking method today that I haven't tried yet, but whether you do it that way or the regular way, these are worth making. So if you'd like to see how these are done, stick around, because it's coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Roy. I am a home cook and amateur baker, and I am here on this channel sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now today is going to be one of mine. It is for a jam-swirled snack cake. I saw a few recipes online where people were taking jam, swirling it through a cake, and I thought it would add a nice flavor to the cake without having to worry about fussing with fruits and things like that. So I came up with my own version, and you can use any flavored jam that you like, totally up to you. And obviously I'm using sugar-free jam. You could use regular jam if you wanted to, but I'm using sugar-free to keep the bites and points and calories down. Now, speaking of jams, this is the one I'm going to be using today because I kind of wanted a blueberry flavor. So I'm using this Walden Farms blueberry fruit spread. And that is, for the amount we're using, it's 0 calories, 0 bites, because they use like gums and things like that to solidify it rather than the process that others use. But Skinny Girl and Smucker's also have some nice jams that I have used. I used the Smucker's the first time I made this, the strawberry. And for the amount of each of these that we're going to be using in this recipe, it would be 3 bites or old Blue Points. I'm on the Healthi Better Balanced plan, which is equivalent to the old Blue plan on WW. So those are the bites and points that I am using. But the Skinny Girl has a few nice flavors. They all seem to be cocktail inspired. This is strawberry rosé. I also have like a blackberry mule, maybe? I don't know. But they're all cocktail inspired, but these are really great flavors if you can find them. Now, one other thing that may throw you off a little bit is I'm not using Swerve as my sweetener. I've had some minor complaints from Paul that if there's too much of the sweetener in it, he gets that aftertaste. And yes, Swerve does have a bit of an aftertaste depending on what you're using. So he found this all-purpose in the raw optimal 0 calorie sweetener blend. Says it tastes just like sugar, and honestly it really does. I've used it on cereal, I've used it in baked goods, and you don't get the aftertaste. So I think, as much as I hate to say it because I do love Swerve, I think I will probably switch over to this just because even though I don't mind the hint of an aftertaste, Paul does, so I'd rather err on the side of caution and use something we can both enjoy. So I'm switching over to this. I also have protein powder in here. And this is the protein powder that I'm using, the Premier Protein Vanilla. And this is the cheapest one that I can find online. I've got this through Amazon. There was like a 20% coupon that you could check on the item. So I actually got this for like $18 and some change. So protein powders can be rather expensive. Now I do have those linked in my Amazon storefront down in the description box if anyone's looking to find these. They have the vanilla, they have the chocolate, and then they have the coffee, the cafe latte, which I really like. But let us go over the ingredients. I have here some baking spray because I'm going to spray my pan. I have a 9-inch pan over here waiting to be sprayed. It has not been sprayed yet, but it's going to be a 9-inch pan. It doesn't have to be square. You could use a round pan as well. And if you don't have baking spray or you don't want to try to find it, you can use cooking spray. Then take about a tablespoon of the flour and dust that in there, shake it all around just so it has a little extra coating to help release. Speaking of flour, I have here 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and I have 1/3 cup of the protein powder. Now, if you want, you can swap out the protein powder for more flour, and it's really not going to change the bites and points. It will probably affect the calories and macros a bit, but it's not going to affect the bites or points. I have 2/3 cup of the sugar replacement here that I've switched over to. Over here I have 1/2 cup of the Greek vanilla yogurt. I use the Dannon Light and Fit Greek yogurt. You could use non-fat Greek yogurt if you prefer, and just add an extra teaspoon of vanilla to replace the flavor that you're going to get from this. I might, if I were to use the non-fat Greek yogurt, add a splash of almond milk just to dilute it a little bit, because the Dannon Light and Fit yogurt is a little bit looser than the non-fat Greek yogurt. I have here 1/2 cup of unsweetened applesauce. You could use pumpkin puree, you could use mashed banana if you prefer. Now here I have 10 tablespoons of my sugar-free jam. I have 4 tablespoons here, 4 tablespoons here, and 2 tablespoons here. You're going to have this divided. The 1/2 cup here, the 2 1/4 cups, are going to go into the batter. The 2 tablespoons we're going to reserve until it comes out of the oven. I have here 1 tablespoon of baking powder, which may seem like a lot, but it really does help give it the lift that it needs. I have 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I have 3 eggs that are at room temperature. You want to make sure all of your ingredients are at room temperature. As I always say, that will help them to come together more easily than if they're cold and trying to maintain their shape. So first thing we're going to do, I'm going to move these out of my way, and what I'm going to do is just add in the protein powder to the flour, baking powder, and the salt, and I'm just going to whisk this together. I know this bowl is probably a little smaller than it should be, but it will be fine. Okay, now I'm going to set that aside and bring in my large mixing bowl here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the eggs and just break those up and whisk those together. Okay, that's good. You don't have to worry about going too crazy with it. You just want to loosen up those egg whites, which tend to bind together. I'm going to add in the sweetener and mix that in. Then I'm going to add in the yogurt, the applesauce, and the vanilla. And I'm just going to whisk that all together. Okay, now with my spatula, I'm going to add in the dry ingredients. And you're just going to want to mix this together until you don't see any streaks of flour. But I'm going to fold it in, because as I always say, you want to be gentle when you're making cakes, muffins, cupcakes, that kind of thing, because you don't want to develop gluten. The reason that bread is needed as much as it is that it's going to help develop that gluten. We don't want gluten in our dessert. We want it nice and tender, and that looks pretty good. Now, let me clean up a few of these things, and we're going to put this into the pan. Okay, so from here, we're going to portion this out into 2 roughly. You don't have to be precise about it. We're just going to put about half of this batter into the pan for now, and just spread that out to make it even. And it's going to be rather shallow, but don't worry about that. Because so now what we're going to do is take 1/4 cup of the jam and just dot that around. And as I said, you can use any flavor jam that you want. I'm using blueberry. I'm also going to do something a little different as far as baking goes. This is going to be an experiment. The recipe, as it's written, works well. But I learned about this cold oven baking trick that supposedly gives it a nicer texture. So I'm going to experiment doing this in a cold oven rather than preheating it. But in the recipe, it does tell you the actual way to do this by preheating the oven to 350. But what I'm going to do is put the cake in there, then start it at 350. Supposedly, I think that extra heat in trying to get it warm will help give it some lift and some lightness. I haven't tried this yet. I'm experimenting here, but the recipe as it stands is perfect. What I will do, if this works, is add a note that you can do this as a cold oven bake. For now, we're going to take the jam that we put in there and just swirl that through the batter. Now this jam that I'm using, because it's more gelatinous because of the way they make it, it's a little tougher to spread throughout. I didn't have as big of a clump in the one I made with the Smuckers because I don't use the kind of gelatinizing agents that this one uses. But I think it should still be fine. But I will let you know if you should not be using the Walton Farms for this, because I want to make sure that you have a successful cake here. And that looks good enough. I'm just going to tap it and shake it a little bit. And then we're going to put in the rest of our cake batter right over what we've just done. And just smooth that over. Don't worry if some of the jam moves with it. It's going to work out just fine. That's just giving us an extra layer of jam in there. But if some of it rises like it is here, it's not going to be that big of an issue. Okay, going to add in the other 1/4 cup and do the same thing, just swirl that through. Okay, so there it is, all swirled through. I'm going to put this, as I said, into a cold oven at 350 degrees and let it preheat and hopefully give it some lift. Normally, as I said, you would have had your oven preheated to 350 already and then put this in for 25 to 30 minutes. With the cold oven method, I'm not sure how long it'll take, but I will let you know once it comes out of the oven. I'll be right back. Okay, and there we have it, the cold oven version of my Jam-Swirled snack cake, and it looks pretty good. It actually finished up about the same time, about 25 minutes. We'll see later how we like this method, or if I'll go back to just the regular preheat the oven method. But now that it's come out of the oven, the first thing you want to do, and I did microwave this jam a little bit, just because the Walton Farms, as I said, tends to be a little more gelatinous, and I wanted to make sure it would melt into the cake. So you're basically just spreading it all over and letting that melt into the cake. It's going to help to give it some extra flavor, as well as give it some moistness from the jam seeping into the cake itself. You want to make sure you get it out into the corners as well. And if some of it goes down the edges, it's fine because it's still going to seep into the cake along the sides. Now I may have wanted to put some parchment in there if I'd been thinking, so to just lift out when it came time rather than trying to dump it out and getting stickiness on my hands, but it is what it is. Such is life. So we're going to let this sit for about 10 minutes to cool down a little bit before we take it out of the pan, because you don't want to take it out of the pan too soon because it is still setting. So you don't want it to fall apart as you're trying to take it out. So we're going to let this sit for about 10 minutes and then I will remove it from the pan. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes. You can let it cool 10 to 15 minutes or so. I'm impatient, so I'm gonna go for it. Now I did cut off a piece of plastic wrap to put on my hand as I take the cake out, but I've touched the jelly and it doesn't seem to be leaving any residues. I think I'm gonna try it barehanded. So the pan is still a bit warm, but just want to get that out of there. Yeah, a little bit of a mess, but I had a paper towel here and did not need this. So there you have it, my Jam-Swirled snack cake. Now, you know me, I like my desserts generously portioned, shall we say. Paul prefers something a little smaller. So I've calculated this as both serving 9 and serving 12, so you can change up how you serve it depending on the size of a dessert that you want. And I'm not going to cut it up just yet. You will have seen in the intro what they look like all cut up. And I'll insert a picture here just so you have a refresher of what they look like when they're cut up and served. But if you were doing this as serving 9, each serving would just be 3 Better Balanced Bites or Old Blue Points. As I said before, I'm on the Healthi Better Balanced plan, which is equivalent to the old WW Blue plan with personal points. Obviously, that'll change things up, but just always make sure you're putting everything into the recipe builder of your app as you're doing it. Now, if you're following calories, the calories for 1/9 of this would be 174. And if you're following macros, the fat would be 2.6 grams. The carbs would be 48 grams. The fiber would be 0.9 grams. And the protein would be 9.6 grams. And again, that's because I used a 1/3 cup of protein powder. If you swap that out for flour, obviously those numbers would change. But if you decide to cut this into 12 servings, each serving would be 2 Better Balanced Bites or Old Blue Points. And if you're following calories, each of those would be 130 calories. And if you're following macros, the fat would be 1.9 grams. The carbs would be 36 grams. The fiber would be 0.6 grams. And the protein would be 7.2 grams. And again, that's for serving 12. So you have options. You could even do it as 6 if you were really hungry. And I don't think it would change the bites too badly. Probably, I'm thinking 4, maybe 5. But the recipe for this will be linked directly down in the description box, as well as there's a link to my blog, to my Amazon storefront. Again, if you wanted to find the protein powder or any of the things that I use, I did try to link everything in that Amazon storefront just so it'd be easier for you to find. And I have it based by categories, beverages, foods, kitchenware, etc. Also down there, you will find links to my social media, my Instagram and Facebook groups. So go check out the description box. There's all sorts of information for you down there. And don't forget to do the usual like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, and comment down below what your flavor of choice would be as far as the jam goes. So I am going to let this cool completely to room temperature before I cut into it. So until next time, bye.